Good morning, everyone. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay. Yes, I'm not sure what the echoing is. So if you haven't already, press 6 to mute your line. That might help with the echoing. And to also have the standards manual on hand.
Something is like, is it you guys?
It's, yeah, whenever I speak, it's echoing.
It's muted. It is also muted. Yeah, mute.
Can everyone hear me now? Awesome. Thank you for your patience as we got through these little technical difficulties. Okay, so if you haven't already, if you can star 6 to mute your line, that will help with any background noise. And as I said already, to also have your professional standards manual on hand. And we'll go ahead and get started. So this is Professional Standards 101. The standards were released last Friday. My name is Courtney Meyer. I'm the Virginia Sexual and Domestic Violence Program Professional Standards Coordinator. So I'll be taking you through this webinar. And if you have any technical assistance, I have Dion Bassett here. You can email her if you have any issues on your end. And Dion is also going to be monitoring the chat. So if you have any questions, there will be opportunities to ask questions throughout. There will be points where I'll stop to address any questions that you may have. And this is just our agenda for this webinar. I'll be going over the brief background of the professional standards, looking at the structure of each standard, reviewing each standard, and then going through the accreditation process. And you will have, again, opportunities to ask questions throughout. So just a little background, which there is a little bit of history in the beginning of the manual about this. So the standards used to be housed with the Action Alliance up until 2015 when the Virginia Code, the Professional Standards Committee was created and put into code, and the committee began meeting in March of 2016. So the work on the standards has been going on for a very long time, and we're very happy with what we released, and look forward to hearing more from you all with any questions and feedback that you may have. So if you see any of these individuals or you work with these individuals, please thank them for their hard work. They worked very hard throughout these last few years on the standards, as well as if you see any of our past members. Everyone on both of these slides has done so much work on the standards. And then just wrapping up the background, so again, my name's Courtney. I'm the Professional Standards Coordinator, so I was hired in December of 2017, so I've been with the committee for almost 2 years now, with helping them in implementing and developing the standards. And as you all know, there was a comment period last September where you all got to review the standards and give the committee feedback, which that was so helpful. That really helped shape how we went forward with the standards at that point. And I hope that you can see some of those changes that were implemented if you were one of the individuals who gave us feedback during that time. And then, of course, just last week we had the standards release, which you now have in your hands. And so going into the structure of the standards, so you'll see that there's 17 standards in total, and they're split up into 4 sections. So we have administration, crisis intervention, advocacy, and community engagement. So each standard is, each standard is in bold, and then under each standard are the measures. So those are in what we have been calling in the committee big bold dots. So in the big bold dots are the measures, and those measures are what you will need in order to meet the standards. So jumping into the administration section. So I'm going to walk you through each standard and talk about expectations for each standard. And so there will be opportunity for questions after I go through this administration section. So with standard number 1, this is ensuring that your services are available and accessible to anyone within your agency's service area. And so the expectations for this so for the first measure, which talks about the non-discrimination policy, this policy should be inclusive of everything listed in that first measure. In the third measure, it speaks of inclusions noticeable around your facility. So having those inclusions noticeable around your facility, as well as having inclusive client paperwork. So making sure, such as having opportunities for the client to put down their gender identity, things like that, for the inclusive client paperwork. And the fourth measure discusses training on civil rights, diversity issues, and multicultural competency. So just ensuring that that training that you're doing for that piece is consistent with what's listed out in the training matrix, which is on pages 11 to 13 of the manual. In standard 2, this is all about the training that you're providing to your staff and volunteers. So the expectation is that you'll be documenting the training for staff and volunteers, and that you'll be meeting the initial training requirements that are outlined in the training matrix for initial training, and then also as well as for meeting that continuing education requirements outlined in the measure. So for the initial training in Measure 1, you'll see that it's required to have the training completed within 3 months of joining. And in the second measure, with the continuing education, to have at least 20 hours of that continuing ed. And you'll see within the measures how we broke down being flexible with the training modalities. So the training modalities can be in-person instruction, shadowing a trained advocate, or even self-directed, so doing online work as well, because we know it might be hard to get individuals and especially volunteers to do all in-person training. So we wanted to make sure that that part of the training was flexible. And then if you've made an exception to the training requirement, it's important to document why. So I had a call come in about an individual who was interested in having a person volunteer, and this person had their PhD in trauma, and they were asking me prior to the standards release whether that person could bypass some of their training. And we were in the midst of doing this piece, and at this point we can say yes, because that person with the PhD in trauma, they have all that knowledge from their schooling, so you could say that they are exempt from some of the training, but you would still want to do your, about your agency, all of the general overview things with that person. So your training for that person might look a little different since they have that PhD in trauma background. So that's just an example if you make an exception to your training requirements. That, the committee would want to see the explanation of why you're making that exception. So with standard number 3, this is about your sound management practices and your operational stability. So we'll want to see what kind of training that the supervisors are taking that covers management, supervision, and trauma stewardship responsibilities, and that supervisors are meeting regularly with staff, that there is physical responsibility. So, what are you doing to protect against the interruption of any core services? And with physical responsibility, having those financial policies in place and having sound audits. Also just having personnel policies in place and job descriptions for all staff, interns, and volunteer positions, and protocols for staff when there's an emergency that might threaten staff, such as mental health emergency, medical emergency, or other emergencies. And then for nonprofit agencies, the last measure of this standard details what's expected of the board. And they're part of the training matrix on the last page of the training matrix, page 13, details expectations for orientation and training content for the board of directors. Standard 4 focuses on adhering to policies and practices to ensure that high standard of professional conduct. So this is focusing on ethical pieces. So ensuring that your agency is complying with employer, employee, state, and federal regulations and contracts. That your agency has a policy or plan set in place for doing criminal background checks for all staff, interns, and volunteers. and as well as Child Protective Services background if for those that are engaging with children. And also that your agency has an ethical behavior policy so that there's something in place if a staff volunteer intern has questionable ethical behavior going on. And Standard 5 focuses on keeping data and VAWA confidentiality and protecting personally identifying information. So this is looking at that you have a system in place to enter data about services provided, and that you're complying with the VAWA confidentiality standards and protecting personally identifying information. So a good resource in understanding what's expected by VAWA for confidentiality, we'll go here a minute, is from Tech Safety. So from techsafety.org is a great resource for looking at the confidentiality for not just VAWA, but also the FISPA and VOCA. So when later in the webinar, when I show you the resources available on our website, this is one of the resources that I've included for you all, so you'll be able to go back and look at this more. But this will help you out with standard number 5. And then finally with number 5, there's having that record retention policy in place for how long you're keeping records and how you're going to dispose of those records. Standard 6 continues with privacy and confidentiality, ensuring that you're including the identity of and information provided by the person served or acquired before, during, and after the course of that relationship. So having operational procedures for record security maintenance and access by individuals other than the client, that there are safeguards in place in case of unauthorized access, fire, loss, or other hazard, that there are policies and procedures regarding how the agency assures compliance with applicable legal requirements, such as the confidentiality law in Virginia, things like that. And that there's an informed, written, and reasonably time-limited client release of information form. So standard number 7 focuses on protecting the civil and human rights of those impacted by sexual and domestic violence. So ensuring that your agency is demonstrating cultural humility, and the committee's definition for cultural humility is on page 14 of the manual. And this also focuses on ensuring that your agency services are available to everyone and anyone, regardless of all those different identities identified in the second measure. And finally, the last standard of the administration section is looking at supporting voluntary services model and respecting the survivor's right to self-determination. So ensuring that your agency has protocols and practices that support survivors' right to self-determination. and that you have protocol in place that informs all clients of their rights. Okay, so for those that don't know me, I am a pug mom, so I thought this was, I had to use this. So at this time, we'll look at questions. So Dion, what questions have come in? So if anyone has any questions, you can go ahead and type those in the chat box regarding any of the standards or measures of those standards that we just went over in the administration section. Okay, well, if doesn't seem like there's any questions that have come in so far, so we'll move on to the next section, which is crisis intervention. So crisis intervention, standard 9, this standard goes over having your agency accessible 24/7 to the public and first responders. So having that 24/7 access and response to all survivors, and ensuring that you're keeping data on the number of requests for crisis intervention services that your agency is receiving. Standard number 10 is ensuring that survivors in the community have 24/7 access to accompaniment services, whether that be emergency medical or emergency justice systems. So making sure your agency has protocol for medical and criminal or civil justice system emergency response, and that there is data maintaining documentation of the requests for accompaniment services and the accompaniment services that the agency has provided. Standard 11 is regards to providing emergency safe shelter for survivors who are in imminent danger. And we have, for imminent danger, we have identified that is defined in the glossary if you're wondering how we are defining that imminent danger piece. So with standard 11, ensuring that you have protocols for addressing shelter requests, including those that cannot be met and those that originate outside your service area. And these protocols should include the collaborative efforts across agencies to directly connect survivors in imminent danger to appropriate services. So this particular standard, the committee spent a good bit of time on because they wanted to ensure that if a client who is not in your service area calls your hotline and is in need of shelter, but they're 2 counties over or whatever the case may be, that client is not just being left out in the cold, so to speak, that you are collaborating with your sister agencies in the area or with the agency that client is calling within that service area that client's calling from, that client is going to receive that shelter service in somehow. So just ensuring that that warm handoff of the client to a sister agency. And again, with confidentiality, making sure you're safeguarding the confidentiality and personally identifying information during that referral process. And again, having documentation, that data on the requests for emergency shelter services and emergency shelter services that the agency has provided. So that's the end of crisis intervention. We'll open it up for questions, so go ahead and type in your questions to the chat box. Okay, so we've had a question come in. So regarding standard 10, does this mean we need to provide 24/7 accompaniment for going to the 24-hour magistrate? So yes, because this is ensuring that you have that 24/7 access to accompaniment services, whether that's through your agency or if you are partnering, or if that's not a service you're able to provide within your community, as long as you're partnering with a sister agency within that community or neighboring community that covers that area judicially. Hope that answers that question. Are there any other questions regarding the crisis intervention section? So, question: when documentation is required, is the warm handoff to a sister shelter's documentation VOD data enough? So yes, for the documentation piece, you can use whichever source of data entry that you have, whether that's VOD data, whether that's Excel, or whether you've contracted with a client management, a management system. So. Okay, so another question, there's working for an umbrella agency. We run the sexual assault program, but there's also a DV program. Will we be seeking accreditation separately or together? So on the self-assessment summary, there is we have type of program, where you can mark that your program is within an umbrella agency, and then next to that is the agency is, and you can mark sexual assault crisis. So I would say, since you're under the sexual assault, that you would be seeking it separately, because since you're only running the sexual assault piece. Now you could get together with the domestic violence program to see if they're interested in doing the accreditation as well, to partner together. Otherwise, I would say that you'll be going in as separate. Separate, okay, yep, separate is easier then. Okay. Any other questions before we continue? Okay, so we'll move on to the advocacy section. So standard number 12 is looking to see if your agency offers a range of individualized advocacy services that foster survivor healing from trauma of violence. So examples of this can include justice system advocacy, counseling, support groups, case management, referral resources, accompaniment services, or other holistic services. And to also be documenting the advocacy services that your agency is providing is the second piece of Standard 12. Standard 13 is looking at how you're working with your community and coordinating services for survivors. So looking at how you're developing and maintaining signed agreements, and those signed agreements can be MOUs, cooperative agreements, partnership agreements, etc. And some examples of agencies for coordinating services, law enforcement, hospitals, colleges, and universities. So those are just a short list of examples, but there's many more agencies beyond those examples that you could be coordinating services with. Standard number 14 is looking that you're providing, you're ensuring diverse needs of your community are being met, that you're providing advocacy programs and population-specific interventions. So seeing that you're addressing those diverse needs of the community, so how you work to provide services to diverse pockets of your community, and that you're providing a range of specialized advocacy services to identify populations within your service area. And that's the end of the advocacy section. Are there any questions regarding the advocacy standards? Okay, well, we'll move on to the last section, which is community engagement. So standard 15 is on the community engagement efforts that promote your agency services and effective community responses within your service area, so that you're distributing information about your agency services and accessibility through multiple channels, such as tabling at community events, having flyers or brochures, speaking engagements, those sorts of things. And also that you're keeping documentation on those community engagement activities. And Standard 16 focuses on the prevention programming that supports development of healthy relationships and healthy sexuality. And in the glossary, we have defined healthy relationships, healthy sexuality, as well as prevention. So under the first measure of Standard 16, we're looking for a prevention plan to be in place. And so after you've assessed your prevention needs through resources and looking at how your readiness, we're looking for the prevention portion to either focus on building capacity through prevention awareness education efforts, or on designing and delivering primary prevention strategies that are consistent with the Virginia State Prevention Plan and Guidelines for Primary Prevention. Now, currently, this Virginia State Plan, it will be officially published in January of 2020. So once it is published, I will be including a link to that within this particular measure of this standard in the manual. But until then, I would definitely refer to the primary prevention guidelines that are already out there from the Action Alliance. They're a really good prevention resource. But once this state prevention plan hits in January, that's what we'll be looking that you've pulled from for your primary prevention. Now we're looking that the agency is collaboratively engaged with others doing similar work in the community, and that you're keeping data on you're maintaining documentation on the number of prevention programs that your agency is providing. And the last standard. So this focuses on community engagement initiatives to improve the experiences of survivors and advocates for the systemic change. So looking to see that you're participating in or having leadership in sexual and or domestic violence focused community groups. So that's things like Domestic Violence Council, your Sexual Assault Response Team, your Interagency Council, those types of community groups. And that your agency is providing training and education to allied professionals and engaging in initiatives and activities that raise awareness. So these are things like the National Night Out with your local police, your Awareness Month activities. And finally, again, with keeping documentation on your community engagement initiatives that you are providing. So are there any questions for the community engagement section? Go ahead and put those in the chat. So the question that came in is whether VA data is an acceptable source for each of the measures, the bullet points that require documentation or proof of an activity. And yes, so VA data, you can definitely use VA data for the documentation portions. Any other questions regarding the community engagement or really any of the standards that we've gone through if you've thought of something? All right, well, we'll move on. So resources. So as a professional standards coordinator, I'm here as a resource for technical assistance. So once you've read through the manual and you start completing the professional standards organizational self-assessment and you're identifying some measures that you'll need technical assistance on, please reach out to me. And if there's something that I cannot specifically help you with, then I will connect you to other resources in the state that will be able to assist you in meeting that measure for the standards. Then the other thing I wanted to just review with you all is on our website, there is a whole section for the professional standards, and that has, I've compiled on the website a number of resources for you all as you are going through and ensuring that you're meeting each standard. So this is the professional standards main page, which if you're just starting out on the DCGS's website, you can get to by going to this tab and then clicking Victim Services. And once you're on the Victim Services main page, you'll see a similar bar on the side, and then you would just click Virginia Sexual and Domestic Violence Programs Professional Standards, which would then bring you to this page. So this main page has everything minus the cover letter that was sent to you in an email, the manual, the self-assessment, and the self-assessment summary. Then if you go over to resources, there will be the drop-down menu, and there's plenty of, So can everyone see the website now? Okay, great. So yes, as I was saying, this is the main page that has the manual, the self-assessment, and the self-assessment summary. And then for the resources, if you go over here, there's a drop-down menu, so there's different sections. Cutting off one of the top ones. But so if we go, for example, policies and procedures, this has all kinds of resources if you need assistance with policies and procedures, and there's examples of certain policies and different templates that I've put up there and additional resources. So I hope that these resource pages are helpful to you as you start preparing for accreditation. And then after today, most likely next week, I will post the recording for this webinar right here under webinars. So if other individuals on your staff are were unable to attend this morning's webinar or are unable to attend next week's webinar, both webinars are being recorded and will be available to watch later on. All right, so just going over the accreditation process. So this is going to be a 3-year accreditation with that 3-year initial cycle being 2020, 2021, and 2022. So right now we've given you the tools to assess your agency's readiness for accreditation. So that is one of the first steps, is to complete the organizational self-assessment. And once you complete that assessment, you'll have a better idea of what kind of technical assistance you'll need in order to meet the measures and be able to go through that technical assistance. And then once you do apply, once you submit your organizational self-assessment summary, once you submit the organizational self-assessment summary, there will be a random selection of what organizations will be offered an application to apply in 2020. And for the organizations that are randomly selected, there will be a $150 one-time fee due, and this is only due at the time that you submit your agency's application fee. So that $150 is good for all 3 years of the accreditation. So after you submit your application, then that application will be reviewed by a part-time person that DCGS will be hiring, which we've been referring to as our DCGS consultant. And this person is the individual that will be doing the site visits. So the DCGS consultant will review the application that comes in and work with the professional standards coordinator, myself, and in setting up site visits with the individuals who submitted applications. That consultant will conduct a site visit. They'll write up their thoughts and summarize based on the site visit as well as application, and provide their final thoughts to the committee. And so then the professional standards committee will then have a final review and approve or deny people for accreditation. And there will be an appeals process if you're denied accreditation and you are not satisfied with that outcome. So that's just a broad overview of the accreditation process as we go forward. So going over the first steps that were outlined in the email that you were sent last week. So definitely read through the manual. Once you read through the manual, complete the Professional Standards Organizational Self-Assessment. And this is for your agency's internal use only, so you can hold on to the self-assessment. The only thing that you have to send in is the organizational self-assessment summary, and that is what is due, and that's by January 31st. I apologize, that's an error on the slide. So by January 31st, the summary is due, and after we receive the summary, we'll see what kind of technical assistance you may need, and or then be doing the random selection and offering applications to agencies for accreditation. And you'll receive further instructions after February 3rd, 2020 in regards to the application piece. Are there any questions regarding just the broad overview of the accreditation process, or that's the first steps in becoming accredited? There's a question regarding the umbrella organization. Should the sexual assault program have a separate training from the domestic violence training? So 40 hours each, or can we look at having a dual training that covers both? Keep in mind, we will pursue accreditation separately. Well, with pursuing accreditation separately, I would say that you'd want to do the 40 hours separately, so 40 hours each. But we can definitely, we can definitely connect more after the webinar. If we can talk through that more if you'd like. And another question, if your agency isn't randomly selected, what is the timetable for accreditation? So if the agency isn't randomly selected, then your agency would just have more time to prepare, and I believe then you would be offered possibly the following year. Those details are we're still ironing those out as far as if you're not randomly selected. Are there any other questions? All right, well, for contact information, just to wrap up, I would first and foremost contact the SBD standards email. I check that email regularly, so I definitely use that contact information first. And then I am the professional standards coordinator, so that is my email and phone number. I will be available for assistance through Wednesday, December 4th, because I am actually leaving DCJS. I will be taking a position at Old Dominion University as their assistant director of their Women's Center. So I will be here for assistance until December 4th, after which Tiara Smith, she will be our interim professional standards coordinator. That's her email and phone number, and she'll be available after December 5th. So are there any other last questions before we end the webinar? All right, well, thank you all for taking time out of your busy days and participating in the webinar to learn more about the professional standards. And please let me know if you have any other questions. My contact information is up still. And these slides, as well as the whole webinar in general, will be available after today because I have been recording it. Well, thank you, and I hope you have a good rest of your Thursday, or I'm sorry, Wednesday, jumping ahead a day. Good rest of your Wednesday, and please don't hesitate to reach out to me if you have any other questions. Thank you.